The Azadi Tower stands at the western entrance to Tehran. 55 meters of white marble, built in 1971 by a king who wanted a monument to his dynasty. He called it Shahayad, the King's Memorial. He did not intend it to outlast him.
In January of 2020, the tower was still standing.
It has been renamed. It is now called Azadi, freedom. Same marble, same height, same position in the city. But the funeral procession passing beneath it that week was not for the dynasty it was built to honor. It was for a man named Qasem Soleimani, an Iranian general killed by an American airstrike at Baghdad airport. And the crowd gathered at its base, the largest public assembly Iran had seen in 40 years, wasn't celebrating a king. It was mourning a figure who had spent his career in direct military opposition to everything the king had represented. Western media that week asked the obvious question: why does this country hate America? The surface answer was Soleimani himself. His proxy networks, his operations across the region, his documented role in the deaths of American soldiers. That answer was accurate. It just wasn't complete. The deeper answer was in a file stamped classified in 1957. It wasn't about ideology. It wasn't about religion. It was about an institution designed with American help, staffed by American-trained officers, funded through channels the U.S. State Department documented, whose methods an American president would later receive in a written report from Amnesty International, place on a shelf, and not act on. The institution was called SAVAK. And understanding what SAVAK was and what it did for 22 years with Washington's full knowledge is one way of understanding what was standing beneath the Azadi Tower on that cold January morning in 2020. Go back to 1957. The Cold War is at its specific anxious height. Sputnik has just gone into orbit. Soviet influence is the organizing obsession of American foreign policy. Every government in the Middle East is being assessed by a single question: which side is it on? Iran was on Washington's side. The Shah, Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, reinstated to his throne 4 years earlier after a CIA-organized operation removed his elected prime minister, was the most useful American asset in the Persian Gulf. His country sat on some of the world's largest oil reserves. His geography blocked Soviet access to warm water ports. He was, from Washington's perspective, essential. The problem the Shah faced was the same problem that any leader would face after watching a foreign intelligence service remove the man who had challenged him. He knew how close it had come. Mossadegh had won elections. He had passed legislation. He had had the streets. The coup had cost the CIA $60,000 and took 11 days. The Shah understood, with the precision of someone who had been frightened, that he needed an apparatus capable of making sure it never happened again. The result was SAVAK, Sazeman e Etelat va Amniyat e Keshvar, the Organization of Intelligence and National Security, established officially in March of 1957. CIA officers provided organizational training and technical assistance. Mossad, Israel's foreign intelligence service, provided additional operational guidance. The Shah's Iran and the young state of Israel had a specific shared interest. Both were non-Arab regional powers in a Middle East increasingly organized by Arab nationalism, and both needed each other. The collaboration was real, documented in declassified intelligence histories, and discreet. What SAVAK was built to do was suppress political opposition. That is not unusual. Most governments maintain security services for that purpose. What made SAVAK specific was who it defined as the opposition. Not just communists, not just Soviet-aligned organizations. Everyone. Left, liberal, secular nationalist, religious, trade union, student group, journalist, academic. If you organized, if you wrote something the Shah's government didn't approve of, if you attended a meeting with someone SAVAK was already watching, you were potentially inside the file.
The file count, documented by human rights organizations working in the 1970s, was approximately 3 million Iranians. Iran's total population in 1975 was approximately 33 million. Do that arithmetic.
The CIA's investment in advisory assistance for this project in the years 1957 through the early 1960s was, in the documented records available, modest. Not in the Operation Ajax category of $60,000, but modest by the standards of Cold War covert expenditure. What that investment helped maintain for the next 2 decades is somewhat more difficult to calculate. The return on investment, as they say in institutional finance, was mixed.
By any standard. You're needed on site now.
There was a woman. She is composite in this account, but she represents a documented population. Working as a university lecturer in Tehran in the early 1970s. Her name, for this account, is Farideh. She taught literature, Iranian literature, in Persian, to students at a major Tehran university. She was good at her job. She was, by any professional measure, completely conventional in her conduct. Her brother had been detained for 3 weeks in 1973. He had attended a reading group. The reading group had apparently included someone whose name was in a SAVAK file. He came back. He was all right in the physical sense. He didn't explain to Farideh what had happened in those 3 weeks. She didn't ask. She had learned not to ask. The reading group had dispersed by the time he returned. This is what 3 million files looks like from inside one of them.
What is the meaning of the third point?
The SAVAK file. The thing that connected American Cold War strategy to a specific woman in a specific city, calibrating what she said and what she didn't say, in which rooms, with which colleagues, in front of which students. The chain runs from one to the other. That's the chain this episode is about. Now, the question the documentary has to answer honestly, because this is the full picture, and the full picture is what this channel is for, is whether the Shah was only this. Whether 1957 to 1979 was only SAVAK. And the answer is documented, and the answer is no. In 1963, Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi launched what he called the White Revolution, a referendum program of 6 reforms that he put directly to the Iranian people without parliamentary procedure. Land redistribution, women's suffrage, the nationalization of forests, a workers' profit-sharing program, a literacy corps that would send educated young Iranians into rural villages to teach, and the sale of state-owned enterprises to finance these programs. The vote was 99% in favor. Referendums in authoritarian states tend to produce figures in that range. But the reforms themselves, the actual changes in Iranian society that followed, were real. By the early 1970s, Iran's literacy rate had risen from roughly 15% to over 50%. Land that had been held by large landowners for generations was redistributed. Women were voting, and women were running in and winning parliamentary seats. The country was industrializing. The economy was growing at rates that, in the 1970s boom, made Iran look from the outside like exactly the kind of success story that American foreign policy was supposed to produce. The Shah called it the Great Civilization. Outsiders called it the Persian Miracle. Time magazine ran flattering cover stories. And while the magazine covers were running, Amnesty International was writing a different document. The 1976 Amnesty International report on Iran. It is available today. You can read it. It documents systematic torture in SAVAK facilities, electric shock, burning, simulated drowning, as standard investigative procedure. It documents indefinite detention without charge or trial. It documents the denial of access to SAVAK political prisoners by the International Red Cross. It names Iran as one of the worst human rights violators in the world. The US State Department received this report. It was filed. The Shah was invited to a White House state dinner in November of 1977. On the 31st of December, 1977, President Jimmy Carter, who had campaigned on a human rights platform, whose administration had made the phrase human rights into a foreign policy doctrine, raised a glass to his host at a state dinner in Tehran. He said the following, and this is documented, this is the actual record, that Iran was an island of stability in one of the more troubled areas of the world. That under the Shah's leadership, Iran had achieved a great respect and the admiration of our own people and, I think, of people throughout the world. He said that the Shah's great leadership had earned him the respect and admiration of our people. It was the 31st of December, 1977. 13 months later, the Shah of Iran left Tehran for the last time. But the Carter Shah toast is not really the story. It is a data point. The story is what it documents, not an accident, not ignorance, but the visible record of a policy that received the human rights documentation, processed it as a cost of doing business, and continued. The Amnesty International file existed. The State Department received it. The reception of it did not change anything. This is not a conspiracy. There is no cover-up. The documentation of American knowledge of SAVAK's methods is as open as the methods themselves. It is in the record. What the record shows is a calculation. The Shah's strategic value exceeded the documented cost of his methods. That calculation was made repeatedly by multiple administrations across 22 years. The documented human cost of that calculation had a specific geography. There is a woman named Farideh who did not ask her brother about the 3 weeks, and whose specific self-censorship in a university classroom is 1 point on a documented map of approximately 3 million points. The calculation was made in Washington. The map was drawn in Tehran. The subscription moment belongs here, and the channel acknowledges it. If you've reached this point in this episode, if you've just watched the Amnesty International report get received and filed while a US president toasted stability 13 months before a revolution, you understand something that most of the people who covered that revolution in real time never explained. This channel exists for that understanding, not to give you an opinion, to give you the chain. There are 6 more episodes in this series alone, and every one of them traces a thread that runs through tonight. Subscribe. New episodes every week. Because the chain doesn't end with the Shah, it continues. Now to the third link in the chain. The one that connects SAVAK, the repressive apparatus, the 3 million files, the Amnesty International report received and unfiled, to the specific morning in January 1979 when everything the Shah and Washington had built came apart. What produced the revolution was not ideology, not religion, not, as was said for years in Western analysis, the mysterious resistance of an Eastern population to Western modernity. What produced the revolution was the specific consequence of what SAVAK had done to every other form of political organization in Iran for 22 years. The left had been destroyed. The liberal nationalists, Mossadegh's heirs, The people who had watched the CIA remove their elected government had been arrested, suppressed, broken as an organized force. The labor movement had been co-opted or imprisoned. Student organizations had been infiltrated. The secular middle class, Farideh and her colleagues, had been trained through years of experience to keep their politics inside their heads. Every organized political alternative to the Shah had been, over 2 decades, systematically removed. What SAVAK could not reach, what operated in spaces the security apparatus found difficult to monitor and infiltrate, was the mosque network, the religious establishment, the Shia clerical structure that ran from local imams to the seminaries in Qom, and from Qom to a scholar in exile in Paris named Ruhollah Khomeini. This is not a story about religion defeating secularism. It is a story about institutional capacity. The mosque network was the one political infrastructure that survived SAVAK's 22 years at full operation. When the pressure that had been building since 1953 finally found an outlet, it went through the one channel that was still open. And the man standing at the end of that channel, the man whose face became the revolution's face, was not a liberal nationalist or a Mossadegh Democrat or a socialist. He was a cleric. The Shah left Iran on the 16th of January, 1979. He told his advisors he was going on vacation. He never came back. He died of cancer in Cairo 18 months later. In November of 1979, 10 months after the revolution, students seized the United States Embassy in Tehran. They held 52 Americans hostage for 444 days. The students who seized the embassy were, on average, 23 years old, born around 1956, 3 years after the CIA removed Mohammad Mossadegh. Too young to have voted for Mossadegh, old enough to have grown up in the Iran that the coup produced, the Iran of the White Revolution and SAVAK, the Iran of the Literacy Corps and the 3 million files, the Iran that an American president had called an island of stability 13 months before it erupted. The building they seized had been at that address since 1928. It had been there through the Mossadegh nationalization and the coup and SAVAK's founding and the White Revolution and the Persepolis celebration and the Amnesty International report and the Carter toast. To the students who seized it, the building wasn't just a diplomatic facility. It was the physical address of 51 years of documented American involvement in the politics of their country. An involvement that had, in their documented experience, removed a democracy and maintained the apparatus that had suppressed their parents' generation. That analysis was not the whole picture. Neither was it nothing. Both things are documented. Here is the chain, assembled, from this end of it. In 1953, the United States removed a democratically elected Iranian government to protect British oil interests and prevent Soviet influence. That coup gave the Shah unchecked power. In 1957, with American assistance, the Shah built SAVAK to protect that power. For 22 years, SAVAK suppressed every form of organized political life in Iran, except the mosque network. In 1976, the United States received documentation of SAVAK's methods. It continued the relationship. In 1979, 26 years of accumulated pressure ran through the one channel SAVAK couldn't close. In November 1979, the embassy was seized. In the 45 years since, the Iran-Iraq War, the sanctions regime, the nuclear program, the proxy network, the IRGC, the Soleimani assassination, the same structural antagonism has persisted, its roots in the specific. Decisions documented in 1953 and 1957 and 1976. The US wanted a stable Iran. It got one for 26 years. What those 26 years produced was not stability, it was pressure. Pressure doesn't disappear when you apply force to it. It accumulates. And when it finds a release, through the one channel that's still open, through the movement that survival had made strong, it releases with everything that was suppressed added to everything that was always there. There is a monument at the western entrance to Tehran. It is still standing. The Shah built it to be called the King's Memorial. After the revolution, it was renamed Freedom. And on a cold morning in January 2020, beneath the same white marble, in front of the same arch, the largest crowd in 40 years gathered to mourn a man who had spent his career as the operational arm of the government that replaced the Shah. A government with its own documented human rights record, its own suppressions, its own dissidents. The chain doesn't end in 1979. The monument doesn't end the story. What the monument documents is the persistence of the structure beneath the politics, the building that outlasted the monarchy, renamed but still standing, still at the center of a country still working through what was built in its name. The Shah built something. Washington helped him build it. It lasted 22 years, and what it built in the process was the specific kind of opposition that a repressive apparatus always eventually produces. The opposition that is strong precisely because it was the only thing the apparatus couldn't reach. Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi built a monument to his dynasty in 1971. He called it the King's Memorial. The revolution renamed it Freedom. Both names still apply, depending on which side of which year you're standing. The chain that connects a Cold War calculation made in Washington in 1957 to a crowd of mourners in Tehran in 2020 is not short. It is not simple, and it is documented. Every link in it was a choice, made by a person with reasons that seemed, in the moment, sufficient. That is how we got here. And the chain is still running.